Jada had always liked the night shift. At 28 years old, she worked at Poppy's Cafe, a cozy refuge situated in a quiet area of the city. The tranquil atmosphere of the place was almost therapeutic. Its patrons, mostly elderly neighbors, came every night for a hot coffee and nostalgic conversations about times past. For Jada, that job was more than just an occupation. It was a break from the everyday chaos, a space where the world seemed to slow down and surprises were as rare as a starless night. The night, which until then followed its usual calm rhythm, took an unexpected turn shortly before closing time. The familiar sound of the doorbell echoed through Poppy's Cafe, but this time it brought a surprise no one had anticipated. Jada, who was cleaning one of the tables near the counter, stopped immediately upon seeing who had just entered. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, she felt as if the world around her had stopped. There he was, Elon Musk, one of the most well-known and talked-about personalities in the world. The eccentric billionaire entered the cafe casually, as if he were just another customer. His presence, however, caused a discreet stir among the few patrons present. Murmurs began to circulate as he walked to one of the booths near the window, seeming oblivious to the reactions around him. With his shoulders slightly hunched and a look of fatigue etched on his face, Elon appeared to be a man lost in thought, very different from the confident figure the world knew. Jada, still trying to absorb the situation, felt her heart beat faster. She had seen him countless times on TV and social media, but seeing him there so close was surreal. Taking a deep breath to compose herself, she adjusted her apron and walked to his table, displaying a professional smile. "Good evening, what can I get for you?" she asked, trying to sound relaxed, even though her voice was slightly shaky. Elon looked up for a moment, offering a polite smile. "A black coffee, please, and, if possible, a slice of that apple pie on the counter." His voice was calm but had a characteristic firmness, as if each word was carefully chosen. Jada nodded and returned to the counter, feeling the curious gazes of the other customers following her movements. As she prepared the order, she noticed some patrons whispering, some even looking slightly uncomfortable. It was hard to understand why. Perhaps the presence of someone so famous broke the bubble of tranquility that Poppy's Cafe always offered. After filling the cup with fresh coffee and cutting a generous slice of pie, Jada remembered that despite all his fame and influence, Elon Musk was still just another customer. She decided to treat him with the same attentive and friendly manner she treated the elderly who came every night. With a genuine smile, she placed the order on the table. "Thank you," he said, before taking a sip of coffee and looking out the window again. Something about his expression intrigued Jada. He seemed distant, almost vulnerable, as if he carried the weight of the world in his thoughts. Maybe he had had a tough day, or perhaps he was simply the type of person who sought refuge in simple and quiet places like this one. For a moment, Jada wondered what life was like for someone like Elon Musk, and if he, like anyone else, also needed moments of peace away from the spotlight. Jada returned behind the counter, occupying herself with small tasks, while her eyes inevitably were drawn to the table where Elon was sitting. She couldn't avoid a mix of curiosity and fascination. To her, Elon Musk was the embodiment of ambition and innovation, someone who dared to challenge limits that many didn't even see. But looking around the cafe, she realized that not everyone shared the same admiration. Eventually, Frank, a regular customer known for his direct and often provocative opinions, stood up from his chair. The elderly man, with a rigid posture and determined look, began to walk slowly toward Elon's table. Jada felt a knot in her stomach. She knew Frank's style well and knew that this could end badly. From the counter, she nervously watched him, unsure whether to intervene or just wait to see how the scene would unfold. Frank stopped next to Elon's table and, with a hoarse and firm voice that reverberated through the quiet cafe, spoke, "Excuse me." All eyes turned to him. "You're that guy, aren't you? The one who started with OpenAI. That wasn't your idea. You didn't support it in the beginning." His eyes were fixed on Elon, a challenging look that seemed to cut through the air. Elon lifted his gaze from his cup, holding eye contact for a moment before responding calmly. "Yes, I was involved in the early days. I helped get it started." Frank crossed his arms, leaning slightly forward. "And now, You're against them. I heard you're creating your own AI. What's that, huh? A shift in loyalty or just another move to gain more power and money? The cafe fell into absolute silence, except for the slight clinking of spoons that some distracted customers used to stir their drinks. Elon sighed deeply, placing the coffee cup aside. His voice remained calm, but there was undeniable gravity in his words. The reason I created XAI has nothing to do with power or profit. I'm concerned about the direction OpenAI is taking. I believe AI technologies need to be developed ethically and transparently, always aligned with the truth, not with hidden interests or biased narratives. That's what I'm trying to do. Frank scoffed, his disbelief evident. Oh, sure. You just want accountability, right? Accountability with your own version, where you're in charge. Some murmurs of agreement spread to other tables, and Jada saw some heads nodding. She could feel the tension in the air growing, like a taut string about to snap. Elon remained still, but Jada noticed something different about him. The slight tension in his posture revealed a vulnerability that seemed to contrast with the public figure she knew. He seemed like a man who had faced countless criticisms, but in that small and intimate environment, the attacks seemed to hit a deeper place. Maybe because he was alone, without the protection of distance or the formality that usually surrounded him. It's not about control, Frank, Elon replied, his voice still measured but with more emotional weight now. It's about ensuring that, in the future, we can look back and know that we did everything possible to prevent AI from becoming a dangerous or manipulative tool. I don't want to be part of a world where we ignore the risks, because it's easier or more profitable that way. Jada watched the exchange with a mix of unease and admiration. On one hand, she understood Frank's and the other customers' distrust, but on the other hand, she felt that Elon was being genuine. He could be controversial, yes, but wasn't that what made a visionary? People who dared to dream big were almost always targets of criticism, and Jada wondered if Elon also felt alone on this journey. As murmurs grew among the customers, some even shaking their heads in disdain, Jada felt a pang of discomfort. She wanted to intervene, to say something that would balance the moment, but she knew that wasn't her role. Instead, she continued to watch him, increasingly intrigued. Even in the face of criticism, Elon showed no anger or frustration, just a melancholic tiredness, like someone who carried the weight of his decisions and responsibilities, aware that not everyone would understand his motives. Taken by the growing tension in the environment, Jada finally decided to intervene. It wasn't in her nature to get involved in arguments, especially at work, but at that moment, she felt she couldn't just stay silent. Gathering courage, she walked over to Frank's table, her heart pounding, but her voice, though shaky, carried determination. "Frank, and all of you," she began, looking around at the attentive faces of the patrons, "I understand you have your opinions, but we can't simply reduce everything he does to selfish interests." Her eyes sought Frank's, but her message was for everyone. Elon Musk is a man who, yes, is controversial, but also someone who has invested in projects that no one else had the courage to tackle, from taking space technology to a new level to supporting social causes like children's hospitals. He has a track record that cannot be ignored. Frank opened his mouth to respond, but Jada raised a hand, interrupting him. "I've read about him, about how he's trying to make AI something safer and more transparent. The reality is that technology is advancing, and we need people who are willing to do it responsibly. Criticizing is easy, but innovating takes courage." Elon, who until then had maintained a calm and introspective demeanor, looked up at Jada, visibly surprised. There was a spark of appreciation in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that she had taken a risk for him. She realized he didn't expect someone, especially a waitress from a simple cafe, to stand up in his defense. "Making money can be a consequence," Jada continued, now with more confidence, "but that doesn't mean the intent is wrong. Innovation is about finding better ways to do things, and sometimes that requires challenging what already exists." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Some customers looked at her with expressions of surprise, while others still seemed skeptical, shaking their heads in disapproval. It was as if, suddenly, Jada had become a stranger to the people she had served for years. The situation, already tense, worsened when Mr. Smith, the cafe owner, came out from behind the counter with a furrowed brow. He looked at Jada, then at the customers, clearly assessing the situation. "Jada, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice laden with reproach. She swallowed hard, hesitating for a moment before responding. "I was just defending Mr. Musk," she said, her voice now softer but still determined. Mr. Smith's expression hardened. He glanced at the patrons, many of whom were already murmuring in disapproval, some even shaking their heads. "Jada," he said in a cutting tone, "our regular customers are the soul of this place. They come here because they feel comfortable, because they know they're heard. We can't have you arguing with them, whether it's for someone or not, famous customer or not." "But Mr. Smith," Jada tried, interrupting him, "I wasn't arguing. I just wanted to—" "That's enough, Jada," he cut her off, his voice carrying a finality that made her heart sink. "I think it's best we find someone to replace you. You can stay for a few days until we find someone else, but after that—" The news fell on Jada like an overwhelming weight. The cafe, which had long been her refuge, now became the stage for her humiliation. Around her, some of the customers laughed quietly, clearly seeing the situation as more of a spectacle than something serious. Jada felt a mix of shame and sadness rise in her chest, her eyes welling up as she tried to process what had just happened. All she wanted was to defend someone she believed deserved a fair chance. But instead she ended up alienating the customers she knew so well, and losing the job that, although simple, meant a lot to her. In the days that followed, she knew she would have to deal with suspicious looks, whispers behind her back, and the bitter feeling of rejection. Meanwhile, Elon remained seated, looking at her with an expression that was a mix of gratitude and sadness, as if he also understood the weight of that moment. Elon, who had remained silent throughout the unfolding scene the previous night, slowly stood up from his chair. He looked directly at Jada, his eyes reflecting a combination of gratitude and something else, perhaps a lament for seeing her face so many consequences for something she clearly did with heart. "Thank you for defending me, Jada," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I don't want to be the reason you lost your job. I'm going to leave now." Jada stood still for a moment, struggling against the flood of emotions threatening to overflow. She blinked rapidly to hold back tears, not knowing exactly what to say. Despite everything, she felt grateful for the understanding Elon showed. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, she acknowledged his words. Elon tilted his head slightly and turned toward the door. The bell rang as he left, and the sound of his departure seemed to emphasize the ensuing emptiness. The cafe fell into absolute silence, and Jada felt the heavy gazes of the customers upon her like judgment. That night seemed endless, but the next day brought an unexpected whirlwind of emotions. Jada, still with the weight of Mr. Smith's decision hanging over her, arrived at Poppy's cafe with a heavy heart. Her steps were slow, reflecting the exhaustion of a sleepless night and the uncertainty about the future. With every glance from the regulars, she felt the echo of what happened the previous night, as if she were being judged from all angles. Despite this, she prepared to face the day, determined to finish her last week with dignity. The morning passed at a monotonous pace, with Jada trying to ignore the whispers and glances from the patrons. But when the afternoon arrived and the flow of customers began to decrease, the doorbell rang again. Jada, who was serving a nearby table, almost didn't pay attention, until she heard a lively buzz. She instinctively turned around and froze. There, standing at the entrance with a calm smile on his face, was Elon Musk. He gave a brief nod to the curious glances following him, but seemed oblivious to the collective discomfort in the room. With the same calmness as the previous night, he walked to the table by the window and sat exactly in the same spot. The silence in the cafe was palpable. All eyes were fixed on Elon, and Mr. Smith, who rarely left the counter, looked visibly nervous. He walked around the cafe, casting furtive glances at Elon and Jada, clearly suspicious of the billionaire's intentions. Jada, for her part, felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. What was he doing there again? And why? With slightly trembling hands, Jada grabbed a cup and served fresh coffee, adding a slice of apple pie to the plate. She walked carefully to his table, maintaining professionalism despite the tension dominating the environment. "Here is your order," she said, with a polite but quick smile before returning to the counter. She tried to keep herself busy, serving other tables, but couldn't avoid feeling the weight of Elon's gaze on her. Elon, for his part, seemed relaxed, but his eyes followed Jada's movements. He watched how she moved around the cafe, her posture showing that she was struggling to maintain composure. The atmosphere seemed charged, with all the customers on edge, waiting to see what would happen. Meanwhile, Jada couldn't help but wonder, why had he returned? He had no reason to be there again. His presence seemed almost surreal, as if something bigger was about to happen. She tried to push the thoughts away, but the air of expectation in the cafe made her mind race. After a long moment of charged silence, Elon finally looked up and gestured slightly, indicating that he wanted the check. Jada, still trying to process the surrealism of his repeated presence in the cafe, took a deep breath and walked over to him with the card machine in her hands. She tried to project an air of professionalism, despite the butterflies in her stomach. Placing the machine on the table, she smiled politely and said with a calm but embarrassed voice, "Thank you for coming back today." The surrounding environment seemed to carry an invisible weight, with all the customers' eyes fixed on the interaction. Elon met her gaze, and his expression, usually firm, softened. "Jada," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I want to thank you for defending me last night. I know it cost you dearly, and not everyone would have done the same." Jada averted her gaze for a moment, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. A small, hesitant smile curved her lips as she replied, "I just said what I believed. I don't think anyone deserves to be judged without having their full story heard." Elon nodded slowly, his eyes showing something deeper than mere gratitude. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice but ensuring she could hear him clearly. "After I left here last night," he began in a thoughtful tone, "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. It was genuine, courageous, and honestly rare to see. So I checked with my team this morning, and here's what I thought." Jada frowned slightly, intrigued as Elon continued, "We always need people with the kind of integrity and heart you showed last night. Maybe it's not glamorous, but we have open positions in our call center, and I'd love to have you on the team. It's a stable job, with opportunities for growth, and who knows, it could be the start of something much bigger for you." For a moment, Jada stood frozen, holding the card machine as if it were her anchor to reality. She blinked, trying to absorb what he had just said. He was offering her a job, a real job, away from the judgmental gazes of the cafe and the walls that, though familiar, now seemed suffocating. The idea seemed too surreal to be true. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, mixing surprise and uncertainty. Elon smiled, an encouraging smile, almost paternal. "I mean that we need people like you, people who care, who have the courage to do what they believe is right. If you're interested, the job is available to you. Think of it as a new opportunity." The shock on Jada's face slowly transformed into something else. A small but sincere smile began to break through her stunned expression. She shook her head slightly, trying to find the right words. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, still incredulous but clearly moved. I just did what I thought was right." "That's exactly what we're looking for," Elon responded firmly, his tone reinforcing the seriousness of his offer. Jada stood there for a few more seconds, the surrounding cafe seeming to disappear as she tried to process what had just happened. A new opportunity, something she never would have imagined the night before. The world seemed to have turned upside down, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like a good thing. Elon laughed softly, a sound that seemed to carry genuine relief. "Just say yes and we'll figure out the rest later," he said, with a warm smile that somehow made Jada relax. Without hesitation, she nodded vigorously, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I'd love to," she said, almost unable to believe her own words. The cafe patrons exchanged glances. Some looked embarrassed, perhaps reflecting on how they had judged the situation the previous night. Others simply remained silent, their faces stunned as they tried to process the unlikely unfolding of that morning. Jada, however, couldn't hide the smile spreading across her face. As she handed the card machine to Elon, she felt the gesture carry a greater symbolism than the transaction itself. He entered his PIN with his usual calm, handing her the receipt, but the moment felt more significant than any she had experienced in years. Elon stood up, adjusting his coat, and gave her one last nod before leaving. "See you soon, Jada. My team will be in touch." He left through the door, the bell ringing softly, leaving the cafe in deep silence. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as he disappeared into the street. When the door closed, Jada stood still for a moment, feeling her heart race. The reality of that day was almost hard to believe. By defending someone she believed deserved a fair chance, Jada had not only shown courage but also unexpectedly changed the course of her own life. Poppy's Cafe, which had long been her refuge, now seemed small in the face of the possibilities that awaited her. As she returned to the counter, the expressions of some customers changed. Some averted their eyes, embarrassed by their previous attitudes, while others remained still, as if processing what had just happened. But in that moment, Jada knew she had made the right decision. What do you think motivated Jada to defend Elon Musk in the cafe, even knowing it could cost her her job? Was it pure admiration for the public figure, or something deeper, a genuine belief in justice and ethics? Share your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.